heart, light as a petal. We will not have steaming rock dove pies, tender meat baked in dough braided by Lissy's hands. I pluck the feathers away, and they are tossed up in the wind like spores and carried away quickly. He loves me not, I sing. He loves me. I'm getting too old for these games. Who possibly could? I let that fall away as well. The feathers dissipate, and there's no longer any bird, no bones, no organs, no nothing. But I know that next year, for just 1 hour, these fields will come up with doves, and a girl must come and pick them, so that there will be flesh of something to eat, not just these tasteless lentils and stale bread. I dream of being a girl in red, dining on golden pies, sweet poultry baked in honey and golden dough.
It was the coldest and hungriest winter that we had ever known, and it wasn't difficult to overcome those crumbling walls, whose short-sighted design only protected against human invaders. That flimsy barrier quite thoroughly failed its purpose and did nothing to protect the inhabitants of forests without, and did not anticipate the need to protect from the dangers of turmoil within. In past times of peace, it had fallen into despair, but now both the town and the country were both rising up against the clergy and nobility, peasants and craftsmen against merchants and nobles alike, fighting for their bread and to keep their grain, railing against the climbing taxes. They were bloodthirsty, lusting for death. They had their evil eyes turned on those minions of the king whose land they worked, who remained exempt while they starved to pay the rising taels. The craftsmen carried daggers by day and swords by night, and were quick to use them. The peasant women swarmed the granaries in angry hordes and made away with cartfuls of wheat. They gathered at the ports with pitchforks and their husbands' swords hidden underneath their cloaks, seeing to it that no foodstuff would leave town without a battle. And the young hapless ones took to wandering and thieving, which always promised a better fate than staying put and working in a merchant's shop. What a time to arrive! I must say, and I'll be honest, I was in my element. I reveled in this bloodbath, in this ambience of fear and strife, with death knocking at so many doors, coming most of all to those still so fresh, we could better conceal our doings. Who would notice a few more missing? Some would be relieved, a few children missing, a few less mouths to feed. And by the very nature of our activity, we left little evidence. That winter stands out in my memory. It went against nature. I tell you, nothing could brave it. In the forest, fawns froze suckling at their mother's teats. In the town, we let nothing go to waste. We licked those bones clean and spit them into the icy river that ran through the center of the town, splitting it in two. The opulent quarters of the Dove King to the east, and the Kingdom of the Hare to the west. The girl that caught my eye lived on the far west quarters of the city, on the very edge of the wood. She grew up right against that stone wall that demarcated the city from the forest. The day I first saw her, her mother, a mangled woman with a pock-marked face and a blockish jaw, was removing the crumbled bricks to make a small gateway, a narrow opening through which to wedge the girl's narrow body. It didn't take much. These townsfolks are fools. Strong and ravenous as we were, it took little effort to burrow through the gaps and cracks and to rummage our way through the crumbling bricks to civilization. Led by Foxcoat, named for his reddish hue and his delicate features, about 60 of us infiltrated the city. Some of us blended in easily enough, and we were able to save ourselves through quieter means. We donned the garments in our dinner prey and joined the throngs of young craftsmen in the streets as they made a sport of dragging the maids and kept the girls from their masters' houses and taking their pleasure. Getting back their own, they said, too poor to marry, and so full of youth and rage, it would be such a pity to waste it. And indeed, these municipal authorities much preferred this game to the riots they had marked recent years. About 40 of our kind had to remain entirely in their lupine form, having resided so long in the wilderness that their shape had long ago become completely irreversible. Perhaps it was nostalgia, but it seemed we retained more of a taste for human flesh than our animal-born brethren. And in this coldest of winters, it became our singular obsession. So weakened and starved were the masses that we consumed just as many grown men as we did women and children that year. Foxcoat had a special proclivity from the grown men. Though many of them looked as if they were already half-eaten, he occasionally sunk his teeth into a few robust specimens. He stood on his hind legs to get at the face and neck, bit them repeatedly, and dragged them off, clasping their heads in his jaw with a sort of tenderness. I, however, have always preferred to join men in their pursuit for female flesh. And the wild I encountered exiled whores, toothless mad fools, and wretched traveling beggars and thieves. but in the towns there was such an abundance. In the eastern quarters, I found those delicate noblewomen in their sitting rooms and salons, amusing each other with tales of fairies, good and evil, flaunting their knowledge of myths of old, of Cupid and Psyche, telling of women of good manners and virtuous daughters. Then there were the gaudy barmaids, the whores in the grand maisons with their rasping laughs and blood-red cheeks. In the west, scrawny little shop girls that seemed to be made of straw, to ripple when the wind came in through the window and stirred the dusty air. And those farm girls, still sturdy despite their hunger. Still, I succumbed to boredom so easily. Foxcoat's next meal in town were two young boys on their way to school, and then a farmer on horseback wound up just being a snack. He'd only managed to take off part of his face before the disfigured man escaped to a nearby mill. He would later emerge, yellow pupils dilated and coarse, white fur spouting from his belly, a fresh cub among our ranks. Eventually, a feisty band of peasants managed to chase the pack into a courtyard where the whole lot was speared and stoned to death. A hulking man, stout but comprised solidly of muscle, held a pitchfork through Foxcoat's neck for 15 minutes before the blood seeped right out of him, and the last of his breath finally left his lungs. The rest of us went around on our pursuits with little interference. We discreetly led our nocturnal lives, blending in easily enough. In lands to the east, we had long known that our kind was being burned. But now, here in France, our kind is hanging too. They even say that those impoverished, ghastly old hags take on the shape of wolves before killing cattle or devouring children. It is almost always some wretched peasant, ordinary and remarkable, a superstitious old spinster, toothless and spiteful and dull as a ditch water, mumbling nonsense and shaking some rusty nail or gnarled weed along over a bottle of milk. The stolen cattle, the disappeared animals, the failed harvests, and they get the credit. They decapitated some poor fellow and hung him in the town square so that he might serve as an example for those considering engaging in lycanthropy. A hodgepodge monster made of corpses all quilted together like some impoverished child's doll, a dead wolf's severed head propped up atop his decomposing carcass. I am nocturnal so that my features will remain always obscured, and I skulk through the city streets just as one among the angry multitudes. The taverns, too, are a favorite haunt. But as I mature, I find that my tolerance for crowds is waning. I cherish solitude. On the outskirts of the town, I spot a young peasant girl in a tattered pink robe walking all by herself away from the city, setting out on her own to another village, so I turned to follow her. She crawled through the gap in the ruined wall, snagged her skirt on the jutting stones. Her mother sealed it right back up, burying that scrap of tattered fabric, piling the stones back in and sealing them together with something vicious and gray that froze in the night. The girl, once on the other side, did not for a moment look back. I hid their yard and ate up their chickens, and waited till nightfall. Then I bore right back through it, ruining her work. I dislodged a few stones and slithered right through, narrowing my body to impossible proportions, the way that only animals and children can. I didn't need to follow the girl's scent. Her little feet left such a perfect impression in the snow. I felt like steel against a small, glassy stone. She sparked a fresh hunger when I thought I burned through all of them. I'm ragged and worn. I succumb to boredom so easily. It all comes so easily. What wants to be eaten? It's been a good long while since my haunches have felt so strong, so poised to run.
I had been sleeping on the grass in front of the cabin. Hunger is about to wake me when there is a kick to my side and Mother's voice like milk souring, and my body is struck with the cold that I had been numb to in sleep. Wastes all day sleeping, or staring at mayflies or dung in a field, or God knows what. Could at least have been pretty if you had to be so dull. Sylvie, wake up. What did I, a hard-working woman, do to deserve a daughter like you? Grandmother is ill. I need you to be of some use for once. Here, take this loaf of bread and jug of milk. As always, I do as I'm told. Don't utter anything but a docile yes, mother. She told me once that it was dangerous to go out after the sun sets, especially at this time of year, but that doesn't frighten me. My blood rushes at the thought of this journey. I grow bored of these dreary colors and the monotony of handiwork, of Mother's biting tongue and stinging belt, and worst of all, her indifferent glare. I am another mouth to feed, and will remain so, as I am still so young, and not very pretty yet, and may very well never be, no matter what Perrette says. Don't listen to what anyone says, love, she says. You're not homely.